nice. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to test this out. Oh, hey, I can hear myself. I hate that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and... Hey everyone, we're going to get started here in just a couple minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Frank Quinn. I'm the Director of Preservation with Heritage Ohio, and I would like to welcome you to our first Preservation Month webinar. A little bit early, it's still April, but thank God spring has sprung and there is greenery outside and flowers blossoming, and maybe we're starting to think about building projects for the summer. So in celebration of Preservation Month, this year what we're doing are profiles in preservation. So I'm really excited that we have, over the course of the next few weeks, 5 different areas within historic preservation. And we're kicking it off today with Lindsey Jones of Blind Eye Restoration. And she is going to talk to us about preservation contracting. And we're going to get into maybe a little bit of the nitty-gritty details of the bid side of it. So our organization, Heritage Ohio, hey, come on, slide. Our mission is to help people save the places that matter, build community, and live better. We are a Main Street leader for the state of Ohio, helping communities with their downtown revitalization issues. And we are also focused on legislative advocacy and historic preservation efforts. And I want to give everyone a reminder that we have just opened up our 2019 Preservation Month photo contest. So if you see that screenshot of our homepage there right in the middle, if you click on that, that takes you to some more information about where you can learn about our theme for 2019 and how to submit your photo. So I would encourage everyone to go ahead and do that. Our next webinar in this series happens May 8th, again at 1 p.m. And stay tuned for registration information. We should be turning that live here in just a little bit in the next few days. At this point, what I'd like to do is introduce Lindsey Jones. Lindsay's background in construction and historic preservation has blended over a decade of experience into a dedication to the specific repair and restoration of historic buildings and public artwork. For her undergraduate degree, she studied both architectural history and construction management at The Ohio State University, and she later earned her MS in Historic Preservation from the University of Oregon. Professionally, Lindsay has been lucky enough to be able to work all across the country. Her background includes both construction management and hands-on historic conservation roles, with a special focus on introducing subcontractors to historic preservation practices. Restoration projects Lindsay has participated in include the Salmagundi Club.
Yep.
Really? Okay. Sounds like a supervillain. In New York City, Stanford University's Cantor Art Museum in Palo Alto, Coit Tower in San Francisco, as well as the German Village Meeting House and Green Lawn Abbey right here in Columbus, Ohio. Before I turn it over to Lindsay, I'm going to say that if you experience technical difficulties with the webinar, a lot of times, and this is totally a BS answer or hint, but you can log out and try logging back in, and hopefully that will work. If you have any questions, we see the question box on our screen. Type them in. We're looking for part of this webinar to be a great dialogue discussion where Lindsay shares her insights. So at this point, I will turn it over to Lindsay.
Hello. So, are we going to go with questions, or should I start?
Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself through pictures?
Okay, yeah. So I put together a little slide, just kind of a representation of where I've come from and where I'm kind of going or aiming to go. I've been in construction, he said, over a decade, but really I started working with my dad when I was too old for daycare. So I've almost literally done nothing else with my life except for construction, and specifically repair construction focused. Not really a whole lot of new, but I've dabbled in everything from pouring foundations, roofing, new trim work, painting, you name it, I've probably done it or have some knowledge of it.
Wow.
I also, because of that, I know what I don't like doing. Yeah. And when I was working for my dad all those summers, we worked a lot in newer developments. Muirfield was a big one. And I found that we were going into these gigantic new houses and just finding everything kind of like beige and rotting, a lot of mold. And so I wasn't really excited about it, and I didn't really care to do construction. I thought that was just something I did with my dad, and I'd become a fine artist. So the start to my undergraduate degree was actually fine art, and then I realized that I actually wanted to have a job after I paid all this money for school. So I thought maybe architecture would be better, and then I realized I like sleeping. A lot of iterations of initial undergraduates, which is why I support high school kids looking into trade schools or taking a year off. Because I feel like I got out pretty lucky. I got out in 3 years with my undergraduate degree for art history. Once I'd like bounced around enough, and of course art history wasn't going to get me super far because I wasn't planning on being a professor or writing or anything like that. So I ended up working for Habitat for Humanity for a year as an AmeriCorps member. Ended up being hired on as I went back to school for construction management and studied that for a little while.
Was that here in Columbus?
It was at OSU, yeah. And Habitat was interesting because I had gotten the position because I had the background experience in construction and doing hands-on work, but they didn't end up putting me in a hands-on position. I ended up being more in tool and warehouse management, volunteer organization, outreach, that kind of thing. So it was interesting because I used a lot of that hands-on knowledge to lead me down this adjacent path, and I was helping in that respect. So almost immediately working in the field, I was starting to branch out and learn the different aspects of what was going on, which became really helpful down the line. But also with Habitat, working on new construction primarily. And construction management at OSU teaches new construction primarily. So there were a lot of aspects of both that were very helpful, estimating, management, all that type of stuff, but still really wasn't getting real excited about my work. Habitat did start doing rehabs while I was there, and it was great because they were saving the shell of buildings, but they didn't really have the setup to do a lot of hands-on restoration for whatever historic details were left. And then a lot of the houses, to be fair, didn't have a lot of historic detail left anyway. But I realized that that was really what was exciting to me, learning the history of these houses and seeing what they had to share and the character and how it added to it and how it's so much different than the McMansions that you find. And it may not be in as great a shape, and it may have a little bit of patina to it. But it was so fascinating to see these things get reused and fixed up and how it really changed the feeling of a space. So I ended up leaving Habitat and OSU and Ohio in general, and ended up going to University of Oregon for grad school, which was really cool. I ended up picking them because they had a hands-on field school focus, and they were small enough to allow a lot of flexibility. I got to work on a couple of really neat properties. I worked in the Olympic National Forest on a CCC log shelter. So I've done some large hewn log structure work. And I did documentation, HABS documentation on the P French Field School is what it was called, P French Ranch in Eastern Oregon. And the program they went all over the state, really showing you what they had. And it was kind of funny because back in Ohio, I hadn't felt that there was a historic presence here at the time. And we have historic resources, but they weren't presented to me. They were the way they were in this program. So even though the program itself ended up being geared more towards kind of the paperwork, advocacy, historic tax credits, documentation, that kind of stuff, wasn't entirely my thing, again, because I'm still more on the hands-on side of things. It was very enlightening to see all these resources and how people were approaching them. And it really got me thinking about more than just how do we fix it, but how do we fix it appropriately, and how do we fix it so that you can still tell what's historic and what's not. Or if you don't necessarily need to separate them, how do I use the original materials that maybe aren't common to modern construction today? it just got me thinking about that. And my thesis ended up being on introducing preservation to contractors. So whether that be people who are interested in starting preservation contracting companies specifically, or companies that are so close to being preservation minded anyway. They work on these old buildings, they do repairs, they do restorations or flips or whatnot, giving them an understanding of preservation so that they can actually market themselves in that realm and do the work appropriately so that more people could find them. It was a major struggle finding thesis advisors who understood what I was talking about or where I was going and to give me any kind of direction. So I'm actually still thinking about rewriting it and maybe producing it for preservation organizations to potentially hand out to homeowners or contractors alike, just as a, hey, here's a primer, you know, something like that. Again, I'm not a writer, so that might be a long time coming, but it's something that I've really focused on because I think that more people could really branch into preservation or have more preservation knowledge and have it being a part of their work in general. But getting out of grad school, I got really lucky. I actually got a job before I finished my thesis down in San Francisco, and I was working for a conservation firm. Is like the little sister company of an architecture firm that had just gotten sick of trying to find conservators and different people to work on these smaller projects that were attached to their larger design programs. So they started this company, and it was small, and I think there was one full-time conservator at the time when I started, and a couple of project managers because there was also a masonry component. So there was a lot of guys doing that type of stuff and only a couple of smaller art conservation jobs. But my job was specifically focused on project management for those smaller conservation art project restoration jobs. So I was in there to go to site, do the estimates, meet the owners, provide insights and planning and scheduling, because I had that estimating construction background, but also the master's in preservation. And so they had me in this managerial role, but then they were shorthanded on conservators. So kind of everybody chipped in when they could, and they found out that I had hand skills. So essentially I began apprenticing underneath the fine arts conservator. Like I said, I had classes in fine art. I've always been into painting and sculpture and different things. So between that and the general construction, repair, understanding of materials and everything like that, I was pretty helpful. And I actually ended up doing this almost 50% of the time while I was there. Anytime I estimated a project, I also put myself in there doing the actual work. So I got to work on a lot of cool things. That top photo there is actually Coit Tower on Telegraph Hill. It's some of the frescoes that are painted inside on the first floor. We did cleaning of all of the metalwork, some of the paintings on the second floor. The first floor had such extensive damage that they brought in a fresco mural specialist. So she did a bunch of like the major cracks. There was actually a big arched crack over that doorway that she totally filled in. And you can't really see it. This is museum quality photo. From a distance, it's perfect. Bottom left is the home of David Ireland on 500 Cap Street, I think is the address. Really great. The artist had died fairly recently to this project beginning. The property had been handed over to a foundation that was planning on turning his home into a museum and an artist residence. He was an installation artist, so he made the inside of his home basically a piece of artwork. And the photos and the history of this, the documentation, there's actually a book or two out there about it. It's really fantastic. He kind of systematically skinned the house from the inside out and the outside in. He painted the whole thing like this concrete gray on the outside, very monochrome, and on the inside he peeled off all of the wallpaper. He used that in like clumps in mason jars. He like set to the side, and that was part of the artwork. He made like mud patties that you stuck to the wall that we had to reattach.
Wow.
It was weird. But then he was planning on also removing the plaster. Like that was going to be the next step. But he loved the look of the cracks and the dents and everything in the walls that really showed the history of the house. So he ended up preserving that behind a layer of wood varnish, like super toxic wood varnish, the type that you should be wearing a mask and opening up all the windows. And there's stories about how his friends would come over to help and he'd just be going nuts because he was living in this house that he was entirely filling with varnish. But anyway, so when they were turning the house over into the foundation, the plaster was starting to deteriorate as old plaster does. Some of the keying behind was becoming loose and the walls were needing to be reattached. Specifically, there was a ceiling over a stairwell. So there was like a landing, a bunch of crazy scaffolding went into it. But because the plaster was starting to fail, normally the easy way out is just to pull the plaster off. But we couldn't do that in this instance because the art was that plaster and that finish. So we had to go in and reattach the ceiling without tearing it down. Big Wally's Plaster Magic. I should be getting money for how much I tell people about this product. But
I've heard that name before, Big Wally.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic. So that was our solution there, and then revarnishing all the walls because the finish had faded and it wasn't as glossy as it used to be. Updating the windows so that they worked. You can see the framing is all missing from that, the windows there, and you could, the window pockets were open. You could see the weights. It was really cool. Middle bottom was Stanford University. We got to work on their mosaics. That's 3 floors up on scaffold that's across the entire facade of the museum. And then on the right side was the Elks Lodge. They had this really great plaster ceiling that was formed to look like wood coffers and painted plaster decoratively. Yeah, that's plaster. And they had a couple of leaks on the floor above that damaged the plaster to the point where like all the paint was dissolved and the plaster was blooming and everything. So we had to skin everything down to the hard flat, remold some of the decorative forms, and then refinish the paint over that. So I'm involved in all of these things.
Let me ask you a quick question on that last one. So it's always difficult, or well, sometimes it's difficult. You know, there's water coming from somewhere. How do you do the detective work to make sure that when you're doing that work that you've already found the source of the water problem and fixed it, and you're doing it in the proper order?
Oh yeah, oh absolutely. There's always forensics involved in this because you can't just go in and put a Band-Aid over something. You have to know that the problem is solved. We couldn't varnish the Cap Street building until we knew the plaster was solid, that type of stuff. So the plumbing issue, I believe in this instance, was dealt with by the building owner, and they determined after a period of time that it had stopped, because I believe this one was on the books for my company to work on for a very long time. They were actually waiting for that to stop. So we didn't go in until they figured that the damage wasn't growing. They couldn't find any instances of moisture, and everything that we touched was totally dry. So if we had found that it was still wet, we would have gone back and said, hey, we can't complete this. And a lot of the work that I do still, people come to me and say, my plaster's failing, and I have to learn about things that I never needed to learn about, because I do have to do that kind of building forensics in a lot of cases. Yeah. I also got to work on big sculpture, a lot of bronze sculpture, stained glass. Buffano was a big artist. He was a popular artist in the San Francisco area, so there's a lot of his pieces around. The top left and bottom left are both the same one from different angles, and just see the construction site that it was moved to. I was out there for the initial investigation, planning and estimating, and then it was actually completed after I had left the company. They went back and did a power washing and re-gilding and stabilizing in the mosaic pieces. The top right, that's actually the Legion of Honor in San Francisco, out on the Presidio area. There were issues with this building having concrete damage because of the interior metal supports doing a rust jacking and just popping everything off. So that was a really long process, and I was still only involved in half of that one also, because we had to find somebody who could do a 3-dimensional mold, like documentation of that, so that they could recreate a new concrete form that could be placed. We had to do a total investigation of the entire courtyard, make sure we had all of the instances of failure documented. We had to do photo documentation. We had to clean it. We had to do color matching. So the company that actually made the form is one thing, but then making sure that the material matched, that masonry color matching is the worst. So all of that was going down, and it was a really, really great opportunity. But San Francisco is really expensive, and there's lots of opportunities to be had. And so I also ended up working for a window conservator while I was out there, trying something new. So bottom right is just a photo of me in one of the Mission. It was in the Mission house there. We were working a couple of windows, and it was interesting because I met him before I had really gotten into windows. And I knew about window restoration because working at home with my dad and my uncle, whoever, like that was just home maintenance. You didn't think about it being a specific trade or a restoration trade in general. So it was really cool getting that experience with him and just seeing his process and timing and estimating and everything. So getting kind of a little bit of everything while I was out on the West Coast. But it was very expensive, and I loved working with both companies, and it just got to the point where I missed home. So I ended up coming back. My first job back in Ohio, like I said, when I left, I didn't really feel like there was a historical presence or jobs, at least for somebody like me, that were, abundant. If I wanted to be a conservator again, there wasn't a Central Columbus conservation architecture firm the same way there was in San Francisco. So the job that I found ended up being with a major development company that was doing restoration jobs. When they heard that I had a historic preservation background, they were really excited because they had just completed one of their first historic tax credit rehab projects a year before I had shown up, and the architect was fantastic. I still work with them actually now. They were really excited to make sure that the developer met all of the requirements for this program, and so they made sure that everything on that project was preservation appropriate, and it ended up being, a little bit more than the developer was really prepared for. The budget was just not there, and they spent more than they wanted to. So when they heard that I had the historic preservation background, they were kind of like, you come in, talk to them, be our translator. So working for the developer, it's in terms of your dream historic preservation jobs, it's not necessarily where I wanted to be. There wasn't as much as we could have done, but it was still exciting being part of these really large preservation projects. I ended up being a project manager for a couple of school rehab projects. And these were, $9 million projects, and they had gone through the development phase, the design phase, and they always show up to the construction side behind schedule and over budget, and you're constantly being forced to try and figure out how to make things cheaper, how to make things go faster. And this project in Pacific was in Nelsonville, and I was in charge of getting all of the trades together, getting all the estimates and everything. And one thing that they wanted for the tax credits, they were going to keep a couple of the monumental windows. The majority of the basic classroom windows that were being turned into living units had to be swapped out for price comparison. But the monumental windows they had to have restored. And I was looking around for companies that would do this, and there just really wasn't anybody immediately around that I could find or that would give me a price. I contacted a couple of people from Columbus, but the scale of it wasn't as appealing to them. They wanted to do the whole building rather than just a couple of windows,
Right.
or the schedule just wasn't going to fit in with the developer. The developer's like, we have to get this done now. You can't let them depict when they want to start. Like
Right.
they have to start now.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a really unique opportunity where I was seeing that there weren't a lot of people out there, and the ones that were out there were very busy. And I loved the opportunity that I had there. Again, was learning a lot, getting a better idea of much larger scale projects and what everybody was bidding and where the economy was at, what we had to do for tax credits, and what developers needed to do and didn't need to do, and that kind of like in between. But I was still kind of feeling that like I could fix this. I know how to do this stuff. And so I just went, I think I can do this. I think we can make this happen. And so I decided I was going to start a conservation company. And I went to my boss and I told him, listen, I think it's great here, but I think I can do this and I want to go out. Mm-hmm. And if you'll take me, I can do this job. Knowing what their schedule was, knowing that I didn't have to be anywhere else, and that this was the scale of it was gonna make my year pretty much, even just for my first year of business.
How many windows?
There were 10. There were a couple of doorway openings, mm-hmm. A couple of monumental windows, and then there were, well, actually there's more than 10, but like a dozen interior transoms, and then probably 8 to 10 monumental scale windows. Mm-hmm. But it gave me an idea because there's the top left is a steel window, and the right is multiple paned, double hung and fixed wood windows. So it really gave me an opportunity to flex my muscle in terms of projects that I could advertise and money that I could use to support myself for the year while I was really getting myself going. It was an awesome opportunity and a really great portfolio piece, and just one of the things that I could potentially do. So another project that came up, I actually was in Wyomissing, Pennsylvania. There was an old factory building that Vanity Fair was planning on getting rid of. They didn't need it anymore. It had been turned into a shopping mall for some time, and I guess the profit from that wasn't doing it, or the maintenance was too much, something or other, and they were planning on turning this building into a parking lot. But they knew that it had been around forever and ever, and they wanted to save historic artifacts from it. So I had a contract doing masonry salvage. So we took down the pediment and columns, and I took down a window key. You see my big game photo there. I'm posing with the one that I got out of the wall, and there's actually one up above my head still in there to give you an idea of what we had to do. That thing weighed at least 200 pounds, and I got it out all by myself. So there's things that I just start getting into that I can kind of flex and show, like, I know how to do these things. This is a couple examples of I was doing masonry consulting there's a Sunbury main town hall, not Main Street, the Sunbury town hall here in Ohio. They had some water issues. So I went and I did an investigation and wrote them a report for how to move forward doing treatments on their building. I did just a quick little job cleaning out somebody's decorative window crowns. You see, it used to be painted and it just looked crummy, and that was just a little thing. I started teaching. I've taught a handful of workshops for Columbus Landmarks. I've been down to Kentucky for a heritage training program there and taught 2 weeks to aspiring hands-on contractors who are interested in old buildings. Took them on tours of local properties and did sort of investigative demonstrations where we walked around and like, what's the problem here and what's actually causing it, that type of thing. I got a really great job last year working at St. Sebastian's Catholic Church in Akron. This was an example of a crest they had on the front of the building that the building was built in the 60s, early 60s, late 50s. And this crest is 40 feet up in there and not been touched since the building was built. So I got to refresh all of the gilding that's 14 karat gold there on the surface. New enamel paint really made that pop down from the ground. The priest was looking at it. He's like, I had never realized there was red in that, you know, and nobody knew that it was actually gold. Half the people that I talked to didn't even know it was there because it just faded into the background. But I got to do a lot here. This was kind of a dream job. There's a 40-foot tall mosaic there at the back that depicts, it's an abstract of the First Supper. I did repairs to the mural directly above the altar. You can see I'm standing on the scaffold. A lot of statues, a lot of metal cleaning. I got to be there. I basically lived in Akron for 3 months, but it was a fantastic job. And I got to work with the architect that I had met at my development job. So really finding out that those connections were the best thing, and that job really worked out in that benefit too.
I get the sense that you have compressed a lot of decorative arts knowledge, learning, and experience into a very short period of time, because you could literally take 10 years, right? I mean, going through classes, and so I guess part of your college background helps with that, and your work experience, especially on the West Coast, helps with that. But it's still, it seems like that's a lot of knowledge that's been packed into your brain in a short period of time.
Yeah, I actually like to say I'm not somebody who's going to do fine art painting restoration. Like, don't hand me a Rembrandt. But building materials are building materials, and in a lot of cases, decorative materials can be just the same. Like, paint is paint, whether you're putting it in a mural or just on your living room wall. They react similarly, and like I said, a big component is going to be figuring out what's going on behind. Where did the damage come from? How do we keep it from happening in the future? I really only need to know about the material properties of masonry, wood, paint. Where does water go when it enters the building? What material should I be using for the sake of conservation, and what material should I be using for protection from future damage? What materials are reversible and what aren't? And a lot of times I can cut out a lot of the information that you might expect that would be needed by not ignoring, but not necessarily needing to pay attention to a lot of the modern advances in construction. Like, I wouldn't be the first person you should go to ask about flashing on your roof, that kind of thing. There's a lot of different materials and systems out there that work fantastic. But I know the basis of everything, and then I can move forward from there, giving you the best case solution for a lot of these things based on what historic building systems were used and how they were meant to function. So yeah, it's a lot of information, but I don't necessarily hold it in my brain all the time. It's a problem solving thing that I approach every project that way. And a lot of them you really find out are more similar than you would think. That statue in the top left is gilded. It has 14 karat gold as one of the underlayers, and then it had been varnished and waxed. And there was a patina on it. And so its partner, so that's Mary, Joseph was on the other side. In recent years, or sometime before I showed up, somebody was in there painting the walls and scaffold fell on it. So there was a big dent in his shoulder that I was repairing. And so I had to fill in that void.
What was the statue itself composed of?
It was just pine wood, basically.
Oh, okay.
They were made in Italy and transported over when the building was built. So there was wood underneath, and then the gilded surface and all of the finishes and patinas. And so when you approach that, you have to first be able to say, okay, what do I fill this void with to bring it back to the smooth layer that isn't going to cause more damage. Mm-hmm. So knowing my materials that I use, different epoxies and things, you could do a wood Dutchman, but then there's the issue of exactly matching and still having to fill. And then layering the finishes so that they blend. It's a little bit of instinct, a little bit of using your basic restoration knowledge, but this can happen on a number of different things. That could be somebody's baluster that happens to have gold leaf on it. So there's a knowledge of finishes, but it's still, this is a wood repair, and how do I just make that blend? And I still do a lot of windows. That's been a major component of my business. It wasn't necessarily what I set out to do, but I seem to be getting good business via word of mouth. And since I can do wood and steel and monumental with very few people in a pretty decently small space as my workshop, I can keep prices relatively low in comparison to competitors, not necessarily on purpose. I'm working on getting a little bit better at my profit margins, but I'm very flexible with that, and it seems to be a good direction for my business, even though it wasn't and isn't necessarily the primary direction. I'm also still trying to focus more on conservation of artworks and building features that, again, not structural or anything, but have more of an artistic aesthetic and historic importance. Decorative tiles, there's that bottom right is an old model home sign from maybe the 40s. It actually has the artist signature in the bottom corner of it, but it was totally flaking off, and I consolidated all the paint chips down for the owner of it, and we're considering doing a delicate infill, reversible, of course, in the future, to make it not so patchy looking. You could a little bit more readable. Right. But that was a really fun project. I actually used a microscope for weeks on that thing. Not microscope, glass, big glass in front of my face with eyes. Anyway, magnifying glass. Okay. Big magnifying glass lamp. And it's a lot of fun. Every day is different. And it's just getting word out there and finding projects and connections, and it's been a great process so far, and I'm trying to keep moving forward with what I've got, and hopefully that wasn't the longest spiel ever that killed everybody's mood and you're still interested in listening.
No, this is fascinating stuff. I love seeing the project pictures, as I'm sure the attendees enjoy. So is that it for the?
Yeah, that's it for my photos. That's kind of where I left off, is like, this is my future moving forward. Still doing some windows, but trying to reach out and find more of a spot for myself where I'm letting people know that there is an historic conservation component here in Columbus, that they can find somebody to work on these things and not think that whatever it is old and can never be repaired.
Okay. Let's take a look at some questions. I bet people have some questions. So, not necessarily a question, but Jenny in Wellington says, I'd love to invite you to speak in Wellington, Ohio at our quarterly design training next June.
Awesome. Contact me through my website.
And then Maura asks, do you work alone? And how did you take apart the masonry elements on the project illustrated earlier?
I'm a very small company. I hire a lot of subcontractors. I'm trying to stay small, or at least grow sustainably, so that I don't have to worry about overhead and keeping people fed.
Aside from yourself?
More so than myself, yeah. On that particular project, I had helpers, subcontractors that would just be like one person for a week. Right now I have a full-time hourly helper, and she's fantastic. My dad actually works for me now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that's a lot of fun.
Okay.
He's kind of my jack of all trades, problem solver, and he's actually working on fixing up my shop and studio so that it's more accommodating for potentially more workers in the future. And that's, between the two of them, that's really allowing me to do more of the estimating and conservation work. My helper is focused on windows right now. And so the windows is really where I actually need help in terms of the amount of labor that goes into it and the amount of business that I have with it. That's where I'm potentially thinking about growing. But the conservation side of things, you'd be surprised how much I can handle as an individual. The Masonry project, mostly the weight was the issue, but for the column pieces, the weight was an issue, and that was when I needed help. But for at least half of the project, my helper was based on the ground, sweeping up and taking the pieces that I handed them and just putting them on on crates so that we could have them stored.
Did you have to do good old-fashioned like levers and block and tackle type stuff to
tied a rope around it and lowered it? Yeah, basically. That 200 pounds keystone, I slid it off of its spot on the wall by putting a bunch of boards underneath it, like 2x4s essentially, and leaning it out and sliding it down to the scaffold where I was sitting. And then we tied the rope around it like a lot, and then did the same leverage thing to get it to the ground.
Okay.
Yeah, it was, it's funny because I've had people, I try not to complain too much, but it's like I'm a woman in construction. I know how to move heavy things, and it may not be the way that the guys in construction do it. I'm not 6 foot tall. I'm not 200 pounds. So I learned how to use levers and pulleys a lot in what I do.
And I'm sure your back thanks you at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. When I initially got into preservation work, I was doing an internship for grad school, and I was like, maybe I can find somebody that'll let me do conservation work or work on old buildings. And he was like, no, you want to be a project manager, and that way you don't kill yourself. And so now, I'm so glad that I took his advice and got all that experience, because it helped a lot getting myself to this place. But I find that I still really, really like working hands-on, and I still can do a lot of it myself with a little bit of, lever help. And but yeah, I don't want to be that guy.
Is your shop have you rated a portion of your garage, or do you actually have your own building where?
Yeah, so the thing that I learned, thankfully, before I bought my current house, was that when you start your own business, you need 2 years of finances to back up any kind of new loan. So if I had wanted to take out money to buy a property or lease something on top of wherever else I was, it would have been difficult being self-employed without a lot of money backing up. So when I bought my house, I was still working for the developer, and I knew that I was going to need a little bit extra space. I didn't know entirely that I was going to be doing what I'm doing now, but I knew that I would want extra space. And so the property that I ended up getting, the garage used to be a corner store grocery, and then they had added on this mother-in-law suite also to the house. So I have this double stall garage plus a grocery store size addition, and then the mother-in-law suite. So the mother-in-law has turned into my studio. So it's got one door that's attached to the side of my house, has its own entrance to the house, like off of the porch. It's been really great, and it's another reason I'd like to stay small, because it's the overhead of just having a shop would definitely, it would increase everything. So I really like it. It's nice waking up, rolling out of bed, going downstairs, and being at work.
Right,
So,
easy commute, easy
yeah.
commute. Hey, Andy, we see your question. Hold on to that for just a second. Janelle asks along the lines of you being in business for yourself. She says, I'd love to start my own company. 1, what was your biggest hesitation? 2, what was the largest challenge? And 3, what's your best piece of advice?
Okay. Biggest hesitation getting started? Money. Definitely money. I am a constant money worrier as it is. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't have to go into debt for it. Windows was really great because you don't have to have a lot of tools and materials to repair windows, and you don't have to have a lot of help necessarily either. And being female, it's a really great starting point because you can, there's nothing that's that heavy most of the time that you can't handle by yourself. Doors they seem like they should be similar, but I've got a door in my shop right now that it's insane. You need 2 people to lift it, much less turn it over, whatever. But windows were great. It was a great start. It was something that was really helpful. And I had that job. That Nelsonville job was just amazing. I also kept my day job for 4 months, thinking that this was just going to be a side gig that I just liked doing before I really kicked it off with the full time. So I've been in business for almost 3 years, but I've been full time for just over 2 years. So that was really important for starting off, not having any debt, making sure that the business was actually going to support me. The hardest thing now, like I said, is growing sustainably. I am not billable if I'm not working. Essentially, I have to pay the people that are working on the job while I'm off estimating and doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, talking at webinars.
Yeah, talking at webinars. Eventually, I'm not getting paid for this. So that's hard because I don't want to stress them out with, hey, we've got tons of work coming and I can't help you. But I'm also not necessarily ready to hire anybody else. So anybody that I hire has to be part-time or subcontracting. And if you're just subcontracting people, they have to want to come at your beck and call, and that's hard because everybody's got their own work.
Sure.
So yeah, that's tricky. Trying to figure out how do I maintain my current overhead and profit and continue getting work and continue getting my voice out there and completing projects on time and all of that. Was there a third question I'm forgetting?
So getting into the bidding piece of it, or engaging a contractor. So Andy writes, what 3 to 5 things should I know when engaging a contractor for a preservation project?
And Andy, I wish you had specified what type of project. So residential, commercial, owner, manager, I guess, whatever, your number one thing is going to be communication. Whoever you have in, whether they're experienced in preservation, contracting or not, you need to communicate what you want the solution to be, or what you want the solution to be, what you want the end product to be, and make sure that they understand that they have to do a little bit of investigation themselves. Like, if you're not entirely knowledgeable on what happened, what's going wrong, what exactly needs to be done to repair it, you should learn about it. You should have enough information to have an intellectual conversation with them about the issue. It's great to have a contractor that you can just call and trust and have them go in and show up and do the thing. And if you have that relationship with somebody, that's awesome. But if you're calling in new people, if you've got a project that you've never done before and you're not entirely sure, then you need to make sure that you're a major part of this in terms of the communication and planning. In terms of contracting them, like actually hiring people, understanding that there's going to be, you're going to be thinking about schedule, you're going to be thinking about cost, and you're going to be thinking about quality, right? I actually talked about this in a talk I did in 2016 for Heritage Ohio. If you can get a contractor to give you all 3 top notch. You've got a unicorn, and you should find all of the jobs in the world to give them, and then you'll not be able to afford them anymore. I'm sorry. But if they're cheap and they're fast and they're awesome, they're your grandpa who's doing it as a favor or something, because no one can do that reasonably for all of their jobs for their entire living. Like it's something where you need to get 2 out of 3, and you need to be willing to accept that one of those is just going to be lacking a touch. And that could be in terms of schedule. It could just be slow. It could be they come in and they're like, this is going to be an 8-week project. And then you might expect some changes and a little bit more length in time. But it's going to be on the budget that you expected, and it's going to be the quality that you expected. And that's a good contractor. If you want it done incredibly fast and incredibly good, you're going to pay for it. The price is going to go sky high. And that's because as a contractor, that's how we stay sane. If I'm going to work my ass off for you, you're going to have to pay me for compensation. Yeah, exactly. If you want it done super fast and super cheap, you're not going to be happy with the result. So thinking about that, if you're on a job where it requires prevailing wage, that's something where you have to know that everybody who bids on the job has to pay their guys exactly the same amount, because nobody's going to pay over prevailing wage. If they're like a bigger contractor, they have to make profit somewhere. And a lot of times when people are looking at bids, they're going to look at lowest bid. So everybody's also going to be trying to cut costs somewhere. Prevailing wage is tricky because as soon as that happens, they have to figure out how to make themselves cheaper some other way. And that's probably going to come out of the amount of time that they spend, the quality of the job, or the materials that they use. So you really should be thinking about, I want a contractor that's going to give me what I want to the quality that I want, and I'm going to be willing to pay a little bit more and not think about lowest bidder, because otherwise you're going to be unhappy with the result there. Yeah, I don't know. Communicate, be willing to pay for quality.
Are there, whether we're talking a commercial project or a residential project, are there building owner 101s, either in the form of online resources or even something in print that can be a starting point for the property owner?
So the Ohio
History Connection.
No, the Ohio State. The state
Board of Buildings or whatever.
God, I don't know why I'm blanking on this. Anyway, there's an old building owner's manual by Judith Kitchen.
Shippo.
Shippo.
Yeah.
Shippo was, I was trying to say the O
office.
first for some reason. Shippo, you can buy this at online on Amazon or at the Ohio History Connection shop, I think.
Mm-hmm.
They have a book, and that's, especially for homeowners, a really great resource so that you can start looking at your building and know the vocabulary to use. And I think if you've seen other projects in the area that have been done similarly, you should go and talk to building owners there and see the contractors that they used, how they liked them, what processes they used, if there was something they could have done differently, what they would have done. There really isn't a great resource or directory that's open to the public of just all of the preservation contractors. So you're going to get them word of mouth. I think everybody that I know of in Ohio that it's a preservation contractor is word of mouth. It seems like they'll put themselves on some of the preservations, like German Village has a good contractor directory, but I've looked at it and they're not necessarily always the people that I would hire for everything, just because, just to say like these are historic contractors. They're contractors and they're good and they work in the area. But specific preservation contractors, there's no specific compendium. So really it's just word of mouth and finding out who people have used. It's hard for me because I want to advertise, but I don't know where to advertise and where I'm going to spend that money if it's going to be the most profitable turnaround. So I kind of just don't, and I've got word of mouth, so I'm fine. But talking to people, and I would say that also don't discount just your general contractors. If you've got a drywall guy, but you need plaster repaired, ask him if he can do plaster repairs, or if he knows how to, or if he knows anybody else who's willing to do plaster repairs. The people in the trades, if they don't want to do it, they will tell you they don't want to do it, and they will forward you to somebody who will do it. And some people will kind of try and fit and work with your schedule, but or work with your interests. But like I said, if they really don't want to, they're not going to try. If they want to be flexible and think outside of the box, this is something for that. If you want to be a contractor thing, being somebody who can think outside of the box, be a creative problem solver, keep that person also, because they can also figure this stuff out. Like I said, there's only so many ways things can fall apart. And so just knowing the appropriate solutions and repairs. If you need new ductwork, but you don't want them to like drop the ceilings, you have to have them find a creative solution to put it through the walls somewhere, or, those kind of guys can be really great. And I think just having that communication, maybe show them the Judith Kitchen book, so that everybody's on the same page, I think can be a really great solution too.
So to give a plug to OHC and the Preservation Office, if you Google Judith Kitchen, spelled just the way it sounds, and the book title is Old Building Owner's Manual, you'd be able to find that online, or go to the Ohio History Connection Museum right there off of I-71 and pick up your copy there and start reading, and that will help you. So that is good to know, good to hear. So Jenny asks, have you considered producing your own vlog? So a video blog.
I mean, I have a regular blog, but I'm not good at updating it. I think, no, I just can't. I don't have the time. I don't have the bandwidth. I don't have the technical expertise. If somebody else is interested in like giving me topics to talk on and wants to come and take video of me or something, I'm sure. But like, that's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I only have so much brain space.
So Crystal mentions that Cincinnati Preservation Association has a contractors list, and the Preservation Office does keep a list of, I believe it's consultants who will do things like National Register listings and tax credit applications. But that's something that Heritage Ohio has found too, is that you will either have a city or a county or a region that has its list of contractors. But we've never put together something that's a comprehensive statewide. Other than I guess that's not entirely true. We have our artisans, contractors, and consultants database on our website. It's a free resource for members, and actually we're just in the process of updating it. So, and then Crystal mentions that Shaker Heights has one also.
Yeah. I didn't mean to say that nobody has them anywhere. It's just when you're looking around, sometimes it can feel hard. And then everybody's individual list there's some overlap, and there's some people that fit in that nobody else knows about. And some of them are restoration, some of them are just good local contractors. Yeah, we're out there, but it's tricky. The advertising isn't there.
Do you want to talk at all about maybe the project that's closest to your heart, the house you live in?
Sure. Yeah, I talked a little bit about how it's not just my house, it's also my workplace. It's been its own learning experience. That phrase, the cobbler's children have no shoes. This cobbler's children their ankles are threatening to be torn off. The studio is coming along. I live in a part of town where the housing prices are going up. The neighborhood's getting a lot better. Unfortunately, there also is a lot of flipping being done because it was a lower income area for a long time. I got one of the few single family homes that are older than the neighborhood, really. It was like a farmhouse before everything else came along. So it's got a lot of history, but it's also been torn apart. There's not a lot of character left. So I actually it's kind of nice because I have some flexibility to not necessarily recreating history, but using sort of what is there, keeping the space, making it livable, and also having my own free reign. I think a lot of people think that preservationists want to keep everything exactly as it is and want to 100% recreate history. And I think there's something to be said. This newer generation of preservationists, we constantly are talking about how your building isn't going to be viable if it isn't usable, if people don't want to be inside of it. And that's especially true of houses. I don't necessarily like seeing places covered up with vinyl siding or facades being ripped off or anything. The walkable neighborhood is still something that's very important, but the interiors, having a flexibility there where you can still make it your own is very important. And I've taken that to heart in my own home too.
Good, good. That takes me, I'm flashing back to memories of my own project house, and the same idea. So I think so. We've established that there's a real lack of people who are doing artisan type work. So, and you had mentioned early on about I don't know, how do you help mentor, or how do you approach giving folks who are maybe you 10 years ago a boost along the way?
Yeah, I actually spoke at an art school the other night, CCAD here in Columbus, talking to students about how they can transition their art degrees into careers in preservation. And that wasn't just for contracting, it was for development, it was for library archives and history interpretation. There's lots of things you can do. I'd say if you're going into the trades, the first thing you need is trades experience. So whatever you can do to get hands-on construction experience using hand tools. Like if I'm hiring somebody personally, they don't need to necessarily have preservation experience, but they need to have tool experience. I can't be babysitting on, at this point when my business is so small, I need you to kind of go and run with it. With a little bit of oversight, but still I can't be teaching everything. If you can get it anywhere, getting hands-on experience, that's number one. If you know you want to be in the preservation trades, keeping a focus on that, but don't say no to jobs that give you experience in other aspects of that. Like I did estimating and project management and warehouse management and tool acquisition and material purchasing. Every bit of that has been important for me getting here where I am. But if you're really don't want to take the back roads direction the way that I did, there are schools out there. Belmont Technical is the east of Ohio. They're fantastic. My helper, Morgan, actually went to school there, and every time she talks about her classes, I'm extremely jealous. I know there's other programs. I think there's a big one in Charleston. Blanking on the name of it right now.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm familiar with that.
Yeah. There's a Preservation Trades Network conference each year. I think this next one is actually going to be in Ireland, which is a little far, but highly recommend that.
I'm going to see if I can get Joyce to pay for that for me to go. That sounds like it.
Can you get her to pay for me to go to?
Good.
Yeah, it's good. They asked me to teach, and I'm still kind of like, I don't really have a focus. Can I teach people how to just look at a building? I don't know. Anyway, I just want to go and learn too. I want to go undercover and just follow everybody.
They've had that in St. Clairsville a couple times.
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
It's always been a blast. And I remember the last time they had it, I was there. They had a guy from Scotland who was a stonemason, and he had piles of stone, and he was doing a demonstration on stone carving. It was just fantastic, and it's so much fun, such a blast to be a part of.
There's also Historic Corps is out there. You can be a part of that. There's like week-long programs where you go out and you work on buildings, historic significant buildings, and it's also a great, it's kind of like AmeriCorps, but a little bit smaller scale in terms of projects. The Young Preservationist group here in Columbus is really great. Joining any kind of historical network in the area, just building up connections. Connections, actually, backtrack all of that. Start meeting people, talking to people, get them to know you, because as experienced as you are, you can be the most knowledgeable person in the world. If there's no one to vouch for you, you're not going to get any work. Mm-hmm. I made friends with a lot of just the right people when I got back to Ohio. And it's really, really turned around for me and made a big difference. Like I said, word of mouth, but the words from the right mouths too. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's a big deal.
This has been very interesting, fascinating to talk with Lindsay a little bit more about her background as a preservation contractor. It looks like we are at the end of our questions. So I would like to thank you again for joining us today, Lindsay, to kick off our Preservation Month Profiles in Preservation webinar series, and remind people to join us in a couple weeks. It should be fun. We're looking at nonprofit leadership, and we'll have our own Joyce Barrett of Heritage Ohio and Becky West, the director of Columbus Landmarks, here to tag team a presentation, and our moderator for that webinar will be Danielle Steinhauser, who is a preservation consultant, a longtime friend of Heritage Ohio. So we're really looking forward to that. Any parting thoughts, Lindsay?
So I don't know if anybody is interested in entering the trades. I kind of mentioned getting the hands-on experience is integral, but it's also kind of the easy part. In terms of running a business, there's a ton that goes into it. Any contractor that you meet, they're not dumb lugs. They have to be people managers, estimators, accountants. They're doing scheduling, investing, networking, advertising, on top of trying to get your project done and investigating any solutions. So I'd say if you are going to be one, God bless. If you are dealing with them and you're finding any kind of frustration with how projects are going, have some compassion. We're dealing with a lot, and adding preservation passion on top of everything. It's a big job, and it requires a lot of hands and a lot of insight. So just keeping that in mind as you move forward. It's a big job. So if you're interested, you're really interested and passionate.
Just from the tax perspective and health insurance perspective alone, it's a big jump to start your own business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it that business classes, they don't teach art students business classes for some reason, or they didn't for me. Mm-hmm. And it's something that having to learn along the way has been interesting. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so it's something to think about, whether you're going to be one or you're dealing with one. There's always, it's a big job, and it can be really fascinating and really fun. But it's also very trying sometimes. So compassion and just communication with your contractors, and knowing that we've got a bad reputation in the country. Contractors have a bad reputation sometimes for trying to take money or jumping jobs, things like that. And I think having that perspective can be really helpful in keeping patience sometimes with work, and knowing that everything's going to get done and it's going to get done right.
Mentioning that, I'm just curious, how many open projects do you have right now?
Right now, I've got 3 that I'm working on currently, overlapping, and I've got 3 standing in, just about to put into contract, that are going to be monsters.
Oh, okay. All right. So stay tuned for further details, future pictures of Lindsay's awesome work sites and projects. Geez, I could go on like this, but I think it's time to wrap up our webinar. So again, thank you to everyone who attended. Thank you to Lindsay for joining us. And we will see you next time after Lindsay says this.
So if you want to check me out, my website is just www.blindeyerestoration.com. I'm on Instagram with the same handle. You can see I update that a little bit more often. And if anybody is interested, please feel free to reach out. Communication through email is the best. Through my website, there's a contact form. And let me know if you have any questions or interest in further communication or anything like that.
Great. All right. I'm glad you remembered to give yourself a plug at the end. Super. Thanks a lot, everyone. We will talk to you soon.